She was given to the Hell's Angel because she was ugly. But what happened next shocked everyone. A young widow is dragged out of her home and given away like unwanted trash, handed to a feared Hell's Angel biker because her own family says she's too ugly to matter. Everyone thinks she'll disappear into the mountains. But the moment she steps on that roaring bike, something feels different. Because the man they fear isn't what the town thinks he is. And the girl they threw away? She's hiding a strength no one saw coming. But just when a spark of safety starts to grow between them, a dark secret from her old life strikes back, threatening to take her land, her freedom, and even the one person who finally treated her like she mattered. Now she's forced to fight for everything she was told she didn't deserve. But when the world calls you worthless, can you still rise and protect the life you're building? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The morning light crept through thin curtains, casting weak shadows across the cramped guest room where Elsie Hart lay curled beneath a threadbare quilt. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to another dawn in what had never truly become home. The farmhouse creaked with familiar sounds, floorboards settling, pipes groaning, and the increasingly heated voices of her in-laws drifting up from the kitchen below. Completely useless, her mother-in-law's sharp tone cut through the quiet. Can't even make decent coffee, let alone run that land properly. Should have been ours to begin with, her father-in-law growled back. What was David thinking? Leaving everything to her? Plain as mud, that one. Wouldn't even look at her twice if you passed her on the street. Elsie pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders, each word striking like a physical blow. 6 months since David's accident, and the wounds were still raw, not just from losing him, but from the slow poison of living with his parents' contempt. She forced herself to move, knowing that lying in bed would only add to their complaints. Her fingers trembled as she buttoned her worn flannel shirt and smoothed her hair into a neat bun. The mirror showed what it always did. A woman with quiet eyes and gentle features that her in-laws had deemed plain for so long she'd started believing it herself. Downstairs, Elsie moved carefully through her morning routine. She fed the cats that lived in the barn, gathered eggs from the henhouse, and started on the endless list of chores that never seemed to satisfy anyone. Her mother-in-law watched from the kitchen window, lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "You missed spots on the porch again," she called out as Elsie returned with the eggs. "And those flowers you planted are dying, just like everything else you touch." Elsie set the basket down carefully, fighting back tears. "I'll fix it right away, Mrs. Hart. Don't bother." Her father-in-law appeared in the doorway, holding a weathered duffel bag. His expression held something that made Elsie's stomach turn, a mix of satisfaction and cruel amusement. "Pack your things. There's a man waiting outside." "I don't understand," Elsie whispered, her heart beginning to race. "What man?" "Someone who'll take you off our hands," her mother-in-law said, not meeting her eyes. "It's all arranged." Elsie's hands shook as they shoved the bag at her. She barely had time to gather her few precious possessions: the photo of her parents, David's old sweater, the small box of letters her grandmother had written her. Everything else stayed behind as they hustled her toward the front door. The autumn morning was bitter cold, and the sight that greeted her on the porch made her blood run even colder. A massive black motorcycle gleamed in the weak sunlight, and beside it stood a man who seemed to be made of sharp edges and shadows. He was tall, powerfully built, with tattoos visible beneath his rolled-up sleeves. A jagged scar ran across his cheek, and his eyes were hard as steel as they met hers. "This is Samuel Dalton," her father-in-law announced with ugly satisfaction, Though most folks call him Hawk, he's agreed to take you, seeing as no one else would want you." Elsie felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Her in-laws pushed her forward, down the steps, toward this stranger who wore the colors of the Hells Angels on his vest. She stumbled, expecting the worst, but what happened next stopped everyone in their tracks. Hawk moved with unexpected grace, shrugging off his leather jacket. In one fluid motion, he draped it over her trembling shoulders. The leather was warm from his body, carrying a scent of tobacco and motor oil. "You must be cold," he said, and his voice was nothing like she expected, low and gentle, like someone talking to a frightened animal. "The temperature drops fast in the foothills this time of year." Her in-laws stared, clearly thrown by this display of consideration. Hawk ignored them completely, focusing only on Elsie as he secured her bag to the motorcycle. He helped her onto the back of the bike with careful hands, showing her where to hold on. The engine roared to life, and Elsie caught one last glimpse of her in-laws on the porch, their smug expressions telling her everything she needed to know about their part in this arrangement. Then they were moving, the gravel road crunching beneath the tires as the farmhouse grew smaller behind them. The wind grew sharper as they rode, carrying the bite of approaching winter. Elsie found herself pressing closer to Hawk's broad back, seeking warmth and stability as the landscape changed around them. Fields gave way to scattered trees, then thicker forest as they wound their way into the foothills. Despite her fear, despite everything she'd been taught about men like him, she felt an unexpected sense of security in his solid presence. The sun was setting when they finally turned onto a narrow dirt road. Through the gathering dusk, Elsie made out the shape of a log cabin nestled among tall pines. Hawk brought the motorcycle to a stop, killing the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy with unspoken questions. He helped her down, her legs unsteady from the long ride. At the cabin's door, he paused with the key in his hand and turned to face her. The fading light softened the scar on his cheek, made his eyes look less harsh. "You can leave whenever you want," he said quietly. "I won't stop you. But you'll be safe here, if you choose to stay." The key turned in the lock, and he pushed the door open with a creak of old hinges. Elsie stood frozen for a moment, staring into the darkness beyond. Then, drawing a deep breath, she stepped across the threshold, carrying all her uncertainty with her into whatever future waited inside. The first rays of dawn filtered through the cabin's weathered windows, gently rousing Elsie from her sleep. She blinked, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The wool blanket draped over her was heavy and warm, smelling faintly of cedar. Hawk must have covered her after she'd fallen asleep on the old leather sofa. Sitting up slowly, Elsie took in her surroundings properly for the first time. The cabin's interior was simple but solid, built to withstand the harsh mountain winters. Morning light revealed details she'd missed in last night's darkness. Shelves lined with well-worn books, their spines cracked and familiar. A collection of military medals hung in a shadow box on one wall, alongside what looked like unit photos from desert deployments. Her eyes caught on small signs of solitude: a single coffee cup by the sink, one chair pulled out at the kitchen table, dishes stacked neatly but looking barely used. This was clearly a home that had known loneliness. The sound of rhythmic chopping drew her attention outside. Through the window, she could see Hawk's tall form, methodically splitting logs for the woodpile. His movements were precise, almost mechanical, speaking of years of routine. The morning air had a bite to it, his breath visible in small clouds. When he came back inside, arms full of split wood, he paused upon seeing her awake. "Morning," he said quietly, carefully setting the logs in the box beside the stone fireplace. "Sleep all right?" Yes, thank you, Elsie replied, smoothing her rumpled clothes. The blanket helped. Hawk nodded, moving to the kitchen with that same careful grace that seemed at odds with his intimidating appearance. Hungry? I can make eggs. You don't have to, she started, but he was already pulling a carton from the small refrigerator. No trouble, he said, reaching for a pan. His movements in the kitchen were surprisingly competent, if economical. Coffee's ready too, if you want some. They ate at the scarred kitchen table, the silence broken only by the clink of forks against plates. The eggs were good, simple but well seasoned. Elsie couldn't help noticing how Hawk kept a respectful distance, his body language deliberately non-threatening despite his imposing size. Thank you, she said softly when they finished. For breakfast. And for yesterday. He just nodded, gathering their plates. As he turned to the sink, Elsie found herself studying the cabin more closely. Years of keeping house for her demanding in-laws had trained her eye to spot what needed attention. The kitchen wasn't dirty, exactly, but it had the tired look of a place that received only the most basic maintenance. Without really thinking about it, she began cleaning while Hawk was outside working on his motorcycle. She found dish soap under the sink, rags in a drawer. The familiar motions of wiping down counters and organizing cabinets helped calm her racing thoughts. When Hawk came back in hours later, he stopped in the doorway, staring at the transformed kitchen. Sunlight bounced off newly polished surfaces, dishes were arranged neatly on open shelves, and the whole space smelled of lemon cleaner. You didn't have to do that, he said, something like confusion in his expression. I wanted to, Elsie replied, wringing out her dishcloth. It helps me think. He looked around the kitchen again, then at her, as if trying to solve a puzzle. It struck her that perhaps no one had cared for his space like this in a very long time. Need to get some groceries? He said after a moment. Town's not far. You want to come? The drive into town was quiet but not uncomfortable. The small mountain community consisted of mainly one main street, with a grocery store, diner, and handful of other businesses. People definitely stared as Hawk's motorcycle rumbled to a stop in front of the market. What really drew attention, though, was how he followed Elsie through the store, carrying a basket and offering quiet suggestions about what they might need. The checkout clerk's eyes widened when the notorious outlaw carefully bagged their groceries, treating eggs and bread with particular care. As they loaded the bags onto the motorcycle, an elderly woman emerged from the diner across the street, waving enthusiastically. Samuel Dalton, haven't seen you in here for weeks. She bustled over, her warm smile including both of them. You must be hungry. Nobody should shop on an empty stomach. Come have some pie, both of you. Inside the diner, the woman, who introduced herself as Nina Foster, fussed over them like a grandmother, bringing coffee and generous slices of apple pie. She clearly knew Hawk well, asking about his garden and whether his knee was still bothering him from that old war injury. Elsie watched in fascination as Hawk answered the older woman's questions with patient respect, his usual terseness softening slightly. This was yet another side to him she hadn't expected. The careful way he steadied Nina's hand when she refilled his. Coffee? The genuine concern in his voice when he asked about her sister's health. The sun was setting by the time they returned to the cabin, the motorcycle's saddlebags full of supplies. They worked together to put everything away, the kitchen coming alive with new possibilities. Hawk showed her where he kept the pots and pans, explaining apologetically that he usually just ate simple meals. After a quiet dinner of soup and sandwiches, Hawk cleared his throat. You should take the bedroom, he said, gesturing down the short hallway. I'm fine out here on the couch. Are you sure? Elsie asked, but he was already gathering the blanket she'd used the night before. Gets cold out here at night, he said simply. "You'll be more comfortable in there." Before heading to bed, Elsie noticed some dried wildflowers in a forgotten mason jar by the window. With careful fingers, she arranged them in a better spot on the kitchen table, their faded colors bringing a touch of warmth to the room. In the bedroom, she sat on the edge of the neat bed, trying to sort through her feelings. Everything about this situation defied her expectations. The gentle giant in the other room, the way he treated her with such careful respect, the glimpses of the person behind the intimidating exterior. For the first time since David's death, she felt something close to safe. The thought should have frightened her, but as she drifted off to sleep, all she felt was a cautious peace. Sunlight streamed through the worn curtains, painting golden stripes across Elsie's face as she stirred awake. The bedroom felt different in the morning light, less intimidating, more lived in. Through the window, she heard the steady sound of hammering from outside. Wrapping a cardigan around her shoulders, Elsie made her way to the kitchen. The coffee maker she'd cleaned yesterday sat ready on the counter. She filled it with water and grounds, breathing in the familiar scent as it began to brew. The hammering continued from the front porch. Elsie found 2 mugs in the cabinet, filled them with steaming coffee, and carefully pushed open the screen door with her elbow. Hawk knelt on the weathered boards, tools spread around him as he replaced rotting steps. He looked up at her footsteps, surprise flickering across his face at the sight of the coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said softly, holding out a mug. He sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on his jeans before accepting it. "Thanks." His voice was rough with morning quiet. "Didn't expect." "It's the least I can do," Elsie replied, settling on the top step with her own cup. Steam curled between them in the crisp morning air. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, Hawk spoke again. "Been meaning to fix these steps for months. Wood's not safe anymore." "How long have you lived here?" Elsie asked. He took another sip before answering. "About 8 years, since I got back from overseas." His fingers absently traced the scar on his cheek. "Needed somewhere quiet after everything." "The motorcycle club?" she ventured carefully. Hawk nodded slowly. "Left the chapter years ago. Most of the guys I rode with." He trailed off, staring into his coffee. "War changed things, changed us. Some didn't make it back, others chose different paths." Elsie absorbed this, watching him return to his work with careful, practiced movements. The man before her was so different from the threatening figure her in-laws had described. Throughout the morning, they fell into an easy rhythm. While Hawk continued his repairs outside, Elsie tackled the cabin's interior. She found forgotten blankets in a hall closet, shook them out, and folded them neatly. The pantry shelves needed wiping down before she could properly organize their new groceries. Behind the cabin, she discovered an overgrown herb garden. Mint and thyme had gone wild, but she could see the original neat beds underneath. After asking Hawk's permission, she spent an hour carefully pruning and weeding, saving the fresh herbs for cooking. Inside, Hawk worked on a broken cabinet door, the hinges squeaking as he carefully realigned them. Elsie watched him replace drafty window slats with precise movements, his large hands surprisingly gentle with the delicate wood. The afternoon light was turning golden when Hawk's phone rang. His expression darkened as he listened, jaw tightening. When he hung up, he turned to Elsie with regret in his eyes. "That was Nina from the diner," he said. "Your in-laws have been telling people I kidnapped you, saying I forced you onto the bike yesterday." Elsie's stomach clenched. "That's not true," she whispered. "I know." Hawk ran a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry about all this. You don't need more trouble." "It's not your fault," Elsie said firmly, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. They're the ones who threw me away. You've been nothing but kind." Their eyes met across the room, something unspoken passing between them. As evening settled around the cabin, Elsie worked on a simple beef stew, using some of the fresh herbs from the garden. The warm aroma filled the kitchen, mixing with the sharp scent of wood from Hawk's repairs. They ate together at the small table, the dried wildflowers she'd arranged catching the last rays of sunlight. The radio on the windowsill played soft country music, old songs about heartache and hope. After dinner, Elsie noticed a tear in Hawk's leather jacket where it hung by the door. Without saying anything, she found a needle and thread in her bag and settled into the armchair near the crackling fire. Hawk looked up from where he sat cleaning his tools, watching as she carefully stitched the worn leather. The music played softly, crickets chirped outside, and the fire popped occasionally in the grate. Neither felt the need to fill the silence with words. Something was shifting between them, the awkwardness of strangers giving way to a gentle understanding. Elsie's needle moved steadily through the leather as Hawk listened to the radio, both of them finding an unexpected peace in the simple moment. The cabin that should have been scary had become something else entirely, a shelter for two wounded souls learning to trust again. The morning sun cast long shadows across the gravel road as Hawk's motorcycle rumbled into town. Elsie held tight to his waist, no longer frightened of the speed or the machine's powerful vibrations. They'd settled into an easy rhythm over the past few days, and she found herself trusting his steady hands on the handlebars. The small town's main street was already bustling with morning activity when they parked in front of the thrift store. Elsie noticed the sideways glances and whispered conversations as she climbed off the bike. Some people hurried past with worried expressions, while others watched with open curiosity. "Don't mind them," Hawk said quietly, holding the store's door open for her. "Small towns run on gossip." Inside the thrift store, Elsie browsed through racks of warm clothing, selecting a few practical items for the coming winter. She could feel the store clerk watching them, especially when Hawk helped her carry the clothes to the counter. "The diner's just down the street," Hawk suggested, after they'd stored her purchases in the motorcycle's saddlebags. "Nina makes the best apple pie in 3 counties. The bell above the diner's door chimed as they entered. The smell of coffee and fresh-baked pastries filled the air. Several heads turned their way, but before anyone could react, a gray-haired man in a veteran's cap stood up from his booth. "Hawk Dalton, you old devil!" The man's weathered face broke into a wide smile. "Haven't seen you in weeks." 2 other veterans joined him, all greeting Hawk with warm handshakes and backslaps. Elsie watched in surprise as the tough exterior she'd grown used to softened slightly. "Ma'am," one of the veterans tipped his cap to her, "your friend here is a genuine hero. Saved our whole unit in Kandahar when things went sideways." Another veteran nodded solemnly. "Never seen anyone so determined to get everyone home alive, even after taking that hit himself." He gestured vaguely toward the scar on Hawk's cheek. Hawk shifted uncomfortably. "Just did what needed doing," he mumbled. But Elsie caught the respect in the other men's eyes. They settled into a booth, and Nina, the elderly diner owner, brought over 2 steaming mugs of coffee without being asked. "Good to see you bringing company, Hawk," she said with a warm smile at Elsie. "About time you stopped eating alone." As they shared a slice of apple pie, Elsie found herself stealing glances at Hawk. The outlaw biker image seemed to fade with each new detail she learned about him. His hands, which looked so rough, handled the delicate fork with surprising grace. Their peaceful morning shattered when the diner's door burst open. A young deputy stepped inside, his face grim. "Mr. Dalton, Ms. Hart, I need to speak with you both." Hawk's expression hardened as the deputy explained the situation. Elsie's in-laws had filed a legal petition claiming she was mentally unstable and incapable of managing her inherited property. They accused Hawk of taking advantage of her vulnerable state, manipulating her for access to the land. Elsie's hands began to shake. The coffee cup rattled against its saucer as she set it down. Hawk's jaw clenched tight. "That's complete nonsense," he said, his voice low and controlled. "She's perfectly capable." "Just delivering the message," the deputy replied, sliding the legal documents across the table. "You'll need to appear in court next week." The ride back to the cabin was tense, dark clouds gathering overhead matching their mood. Elsie's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Everything she'd inherited from her late husband, the land, the small savings account, her chance at independence, could be taken away. As soon as they reached the cabin, Elsie began pacing the worn floorboards. "They're going to take everything," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. "They never thought I deserved any of it, and now they'll prove it." "Hey!" Hawk's firm but gentle voice cut through her spiral. "Look at me, Elsie." He waited until she met his eyes. "You have rights. The law protects property owners. We'll figure this out together." "Promise?" The word slipped out before she could stop it, small and vulnerable. "Promise." His reply was immediate and solid as the mountains outside. Later that evening, while chopping vegetables for dinner, Elsie found herself talking about things she'd kept buried for years. "I used to take night classes," she admitted, knife moving steadily against the cutting board. "Basic law courses, mostly. I wanted to understand my rights, maybe help others someday." Hawk looked up from where he was building a fire. "What happened?" "My husband." She paused, selecting her words carefully. "He said it wasn't proper for a wife to waste time on such things. Said I should focus on being a good homemaker instead." "Sounds like he was afraid of you getting too smart." Hawk's voice carried a note of admiration that made her cheeks warm. "Maybe." Elsie smiled slightly. "I still remember most of it, though. Property law, contracts, basic civil rights." "That knowledge might come in handy now," Hawk said thoughtfully. "You're stronger than they think, Elsie. Smarter, too." She was about to respond when something caught her eye through the window. Tiny white flakes were drifting down from the heavy sky, the first snow of winter. They watched together as the flakes grew thicker, beginning to dust the ground outside. The sight would have been peaceful if not for the storm they knew was coming. Not just the winter weather, but the legal battle ahead. Yet, somehow, standing in the warm kitchen with Hawk's steady presence nearby, Elsie felt less afraid than she had in years. Morning light filtered through frost-covered windows as Hawk knelt before the stone fireplace, carefully adding logs to rebuild the dying embers. The first snowfall had left the world outside hushed and white, transforming the landscape into a pristine blanket that stretched as far as the eye could see. In the small kitchen, Elsie stirred a pot of oatmeal, the wooden spoon making gentle circles as steam rose in delicate wisps. The familiar routine of cooking brought her a measure of calm, despite the worry that had kept her tossing and turning all night. "Smells good," Hawk said, straightening up from the fireplace. His voice was morning rough but warm. "Just oatmeal," Elsie replied modestly, adding a sprinkle of cinnamon. "But I found some honey in the pantry." They settled at the worn kitchen table, the legal papers from yesterday spread between their breakfast bowls. Elsie's hands trembled slightly as she reached for a document. "We need to be smart about this," Hawk said, watching her carefully. "Your in-laws think they can bully their way through the system, but evidence speaks louder than accusations." Elsie nodded, squaring her shoulders. "I brought some papers from the farmhouse before they made me leave. They're in my duffel bag." She retrieved a manila envelope, its edges worn and corners softened from being hastily packed. As she spread the contents across the table, Hawk cleared their breakfast dishes to make room. "Bank statements," Elsie explained, sorting through the papers. "Tax forms, property records, everything I could grab when I realized things were getting worse." Hawk pulled his chair closer, their shoulders nearly touching as they bent over the documents. Hours passed as they combed through years of financial records. The fire crackled steadily, casting dancing shadows across their focused faces. "Look at this," Elsie said suddenly, her voice sharp with recognition. She pointed to a series of checks. "These are supposed to be my husband's signatures, but—" She traced the writing with her finger. "The handwriting changes after he got sick. It's similar but not the same." Hawk leaned in, studying the signatures. "Could be forgery. When did your husband become too ill to handle his own affairs?" 3 months before he passed." Elsie's voice grew quiet. "His parents took over everything then. They said they were helping, but they never let me see any paperwork." "And these checks are dated after that?" Hawk's expression darkened as Elsie nodded. "That's more than suspicious. That's fraud." They worked through lunch, making careful notes and organizing documents into clear evidence of financial misconduct. Elsie found missing checks that should have gone to her husband's medical care, records of withdrawals she'd never authorized, and property agreements with falsified signatures. By mid-afternoon, their eyes were strained from reading small print, and tension had settled into their shoulders. Hawk stood, stretching his tall frame. "Time for a break," he announced, "and there's something else we need to work on." Elsie looked up, questioning. "Self-defense," he said simply. "Part of protecting yourself is knowing how to stay safe." They cleared space in the living room, pushing furniture against the walls. Hawk laid down some old blankets for padding on the wooden floor. "I'm not sure about this," Elsie said uncertainly, standing awkwardly in the center of the room. "Trust me," Hawk replied gently. "I'll teach you the basics, nothing complicated." He showed her how to stand, feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent. His hands were careful and respectful as he adjusted her stance, showing her how to maintain balance. "The key is using your attacker's strength against them," he explained, demonstrating a simple wrist hold. "Size doesn't matter as much as technique." To both their surprise, Elsie proved to be a quick study. Her natural grace and attention to detail helped her pick up the movements easily. After an hour of practice, she successfully broke free from several different holds, her confidence growing with each small victory. "You're a natural," Hawk said, genuine admiration in his voice, as she executed a perfect escape maneuver. Elsie felt warmth bloom in her chest at the praise. No one had ever believed in her abilities before, let alone encouraged them. As evening approached, they prepared a simple dinner together, moving around the kitchen with newfound ease in each other's presence. Elsie made grilled cheese sandwiches while Hawk heated up homemade tomato soup they'd found in the freezer. "Thank you," Elsie said softly as they sat down to eat. "For everything. For believing in me when—" She swallowed hard. "When no one else ever did." Hawk was quiet for a moment, stirring his soup thoughtfully. "Courage recognizes courage," he finally said, his voice low and sincere. "You've got more strength than you know, Elsie. Always have, I expect. Just needed someone to see it." After dinner, they settled in the living room, the fire casting a warm glow across the cabin. Hawk made hot cocoa, adding extra marshmallows to Elsie's mug with a small smile. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling around the corners of the cabin and rattling the windows. They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their cocoa and watching the flames dance. The day's discoveries and activities had forged something new between them. A partnership, a shared purpose, a deepening trust. When Elsie's eyes began to grow heavy, she reluctantly stood to head to bed. "Good night, Hawk," she said softly. "Good night, Elsie," he replied, his voice gentle in the firelit room. "Sleep well." In their separate rooms, they both drifted off to the sound of the winter wind, each feeling more anchored than they had in years. The threat of tomorrow's battles remained, but they would face them together, stronger for having found an unexpected ally in each other. The morning sun glinted off fresh snow as Elsie worked steadily on the cabin's front porch, pushing drifts aside with a worn wooden shovel. Her breath formed small clouds in the crisp air while she cleared a path, making sure to scatter salt on the steps to prevent ice from forming. The physical work felt good, giving her time to think and plan. Moving to the small herb garden she'd discovered days earlier, Elsie carefully brushed away snow from the hardy rosemary and thyme plants. She'd found old coffee cans in the shed and repurposed them as protective covers for the most delicate herbs, hoping they might survive until spring. The mint had already gone dormant, but its roots ran deep, promising to return when the weather warmed. The rumble of Hawk's motorcycle announced his return from town. He pulled up slowly, bags of groceries secured to the bike's back. Elsie noticed how he always drove extra carefully in the snow, respecting the weather's power. As she helped him unload the supplies, he reached into his jacket pocket. "Got something for you," he said, pulling out a small paper packet. "Thought you might like these for when spring comes." Elsie's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the gift. Vegetable and flower seeds, carefully selected for the mountain climate. Such a simple thing, yet it spoke volumes. It meant he saw her efforts to make the cabin a home. It meant he believed she'd still be here when winter ended. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the packet close. "I'll start them indoors once it gets closer to planting time." They carried the groceries inside together, working in comfortable silence to put everything away. The cabin's warmth enveloped them after the morning chill, and Elsie set about making fresh coffee, while Hawk sorted through the mail he'd collected. "Legal papers came," he said, holding up a thick envelope, "from the attorney's office." They spent the afternoon at the kitchen table, organizing documents and preparing Elsie's statement. She practiced telling her story, how her in-laws had slowly taken control after her husband's illness, how they'd isolated her, how they'd tried to strip away her dignity along with her property rights. "Remember," Hawk encouraged gently, "you don't have to make yourself smaller anymore. Your truth matters." As they worked, pieces of their pasts emerged naturally in conversation. Hawk spoke of his time overseas, of brothers lost in combat, of nightmares that still woke him some nights. Elsie shared memories of her marriage, the good early days, the slow decline, the years of walking on eggshells around her husband's family. "I kept thinking if I just tried harder, was quieter, did everything perfectly." She trailed off, staring at her hands. "That wasn't your fault," Hawk said firmly. "Some people just need to tear others down to feel big." The afternoon light faded into evening, and Elsie stirred a pot of vegetable soup on the stove, while Hawk built up the fire. The cabin filled with warmth and savory aromas, lanterns casting a soft glow over the wooden walls. It felt like home, in a way neither of them had experienced in years. A knock at the door startled them both. Hawk moved protectively toward the entrance, but relaxed when he recognized Pastor Joseph Granger's silhouette through the window. "Evening, folks," the pastor said warmly as they opened the door. "Hope you don't mind me stopping by." He held up 2 covered dishes. "The Foster sisters sent these pies along. 1 apple, 1 cherry." Elsie welcomed him in, touched by the gesture. As she served coffee and pie slices, Pastor Granger spoke of his concerns about the rumors spreading through town. "Those in-laws of yours have been telling tales," he said, his kind face serious. "But plenty of us remember how they treated their own son when he was sick. Not many are fooled by their accusations." "Thank you, Pastor," Elsie said softly. "It means a lot, knowing someone believes us." "More than someone," he assured her. "The Foster sisters have been quite vocal in your defense, and they're not alone. This community may surprise you." They talked for almost an hour, the pastor's steady presence bringing comfort to the cabin. When he finally rose to leave, both Hawk and Elsie walked him to the door. They stood together in the doorway, watching snowflakes dance in the porch light's beam while Pastor Granger's car disappeared down the snowy drive. The night air was crisp and clean, full of winter's promise. Elsie felt Hawk's solid presence beside her, strong and reassuring. Without a word, they stepped back inside their shared sanctuary, closing the door on the cold and the world's judgment. In the warmth of the cabin, they had found something neither expected, an alliance growing stronger with each passing day. The morning sun painted golden stripes across fresh snow as Elsie balanced on a wooden stool, carefully hanging paper stars she'd crafted from old sheet music. Each one caught the light differently, casting delicate shadows on the cabin's log walls. The scent of pine filled the air from the branches she'd gathered, weaving them into garlands that draped across the mantel and window frames. She stepped back to admire her work, the simple decorations transforming the rustic space into something magical. A small pine tree stood in the corner, really just a sapling Hawk had carefully transplanted into a bucket. But it made her heart swell with unexpected joy. She'd forgotten how much she loved Christmas, how the season could make everything feel new again. The rumble of Hawk's motorcycle announced his return from town. Elsie watched through the frosted window as he dismounted, his arms full of mysterious packages wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Her chest tightened at the sight. She hadn't expected gifts, hadn't dared hope for such normalcy. "Need help?" she called, opening the door as he approached. "I've got it," he answered, but his usual confidence seemed softened by shyness as he carried the parcels inside. He placed them carefully under the tiny tree, adjusting their positions with surprising attention to detail. "The Foster sisters will be here at 4 o'clock, Elsie said, trying to mask her own nervousness. "I hope they like simple food. I'm making chicken and dumplings, some roasted vegetables." "They'll love anything you cook," Hawk assured her. He hesitated, then added, "Need help in the kitchen?" Together they prepared the holiday meal, moving around each other in an easy rhythm they'd developed over the past weeks. Hawk proved surprisingly capable with a knife, carefully chopping carrots and potatoes while Elsie worked on the dumplings. The kitchen filled with warmth and savory aromas as they cooked. "I've never had anyone to cook Christmas dinner for before," Elsie admitted softly, kneading the dumpling dough. Hawk paused in his chopping. "Me neither," he said. "Not since coming back from overseas." Their eyes met briefly, understanding passing between them. Both knew what it meant to be lonely during the holidays, to watch others celebrate while feeling like outsiders. At precisely 4 o'clock, Nina and Clara Foster arrived, their cheeks pink from the cold, arms laden with cookies and small gifts. The elderly sisters burst into the cabin like a gust of warm wind, exclaiming over every decoration. "Oh, those stars are simply precious," Clara cooed, adjusting her thick glasses to peer at them. "And look at this sweet little tree," Nina added, clapping her hands together. "Reminds me of the ones Mama used to put up when we were girls." Their enthusiasm was infectious, filling the cabin with laughter and stories. They settled around the table Hawk had expanded using an old door laid across sawhorses, covered with Elsie's carefully pressed tablecloth. The sisters shared tales of Christmases past, of town history, of the changes they'd seen over their 8 decades of life. "You know," Nina said, accepting a second helping of dumplings, "this is the nicest Christmas we've had in years. Our children are all scattered now, too busy with their own families to visit." "But look at us," Clara added brightly, "making new family right here." Elsie caught Hawk's eye across the table, saw the same surprise and warmth she felt reflected there. Family. The word settled over them like a blessing. After dinner, they exchanged simple gifts: cookies, knitted scarves, small tokens that meant more than their modest nature suggested. The sisters stayed until the early evening, when the winter sky began darkening to indigo. "Don't forget about the town meeting next week," Nina reminded them at the door. "We'll save you seats right up front." "You show those awful in-laws what real family looks like," Clara added with surprising fierceness. After they left, the cabin felt different, as if their presence had added another layer of warmth to the walls. Elsie began, clearing dishes, but Hawk touched her arm gently. "Wait," he said. "I have something for you." He retrieved a package from under the tree, wrapped in brown paper but tied with a red ribbon that made Elsie's throat tight with emotion. She sat on the sofa to open it, careful with the wrapping even though her hands trembled slightly. Inside was a wooden box, expertly crafted with dovetail joints and a smooth finish that spoke of hours of patient work. The lid was carved with delicate vines and flowers, and when she opened it, she found dozens of seed packets nestled in neat rows: vegetables, herbs, flowers of all kinds. "For your garden," Hawk said quietly. "Come spring." Elsie traced the carved patterns with her fingertips, understanding the promise contained in this gift: a future. Roots, life itself waiting to bloom. She stood and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "I haven't felt this safe in so long." His arms came around her carefully, strong but gentle. They stood like that for a long moment, the Christmas tree twinkling beside them. Later, they carried blankets out to the porch, settling into the old wooden swing. The night was clear and cold, moonlight turning the snow-covered landscape into silver. Tiny ice crystals danced in the air, catching the light like stars fallen to earth. Elsie felt the gentle sway of the swing, the solid warmth of Hawk beside her. When he reached over to brush a stray lock of hair from her face, his touch was feather-light. Something bloomed in her heart then, delicate and unexpected as the first spring flower pushing through winter soil. Christmas morning dawned bright and crisp, sunlight sparkling off the fresh snow like scattered diamonds. Elsie hummed softly as she mixed pancake batter, the kitchen warm from the wood stove. The peaceful moment shattered when Hawk's phone rang. "Bill Jenkins' furnace went out," Hawk explained, already pulling on his heavy coat. "He's 83, living alone. Can't leave him freezing on Christmas." Elsie nodded, understanding. "Of course not. I'll keep busy here. Maybe try Mama Foster's bread recipe." "I won't be long," Hawk promised, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead that made her heart flutter. "Just need to get him set up with some space heaters until the repair shop opens tomorrow." She watched from the window as his motorcycle disappeared down the snowy road, then turned to the kitchen. Soon, the cabin filled with the comforting smell of baking bread. 1 hour passed, then 2. By early afternoon, worry began gnawing at her stomach. The bread cooled untouched on the counter as she paced. The frantic pounding on the door made her jump. She opened it to find Tom from the hardware store and Sarah, who worked at the diner, both red-faced and breathing hard. "Elsie, you need to come quick," Sarah gasped. "It's Hawk. He's been hurt bad." Tom's face was grim. His old motorcycle club. They jumped him, outside Bill's place. Someone recognized him in town yesterday, must have called them. The world tilted sideways. Elsie grabbed her coat with trembling hands. Take me to him. Please. The 20-minute drive to County General felt like hours. Elsie barely registered Tom's explanation. Something about Hawk's former club members believing he had betrayed them by leaving. How they'd been waiting for a chance at revenge. The hospital corridors seemed endless. When they finally reached Hawk's room, Elsie's knees nearly buckled. He lay still and pale against stark white sheets, his face bruised, monitors beeping steadily beside him. An IV dripped clear fluid into his arm. "Hawk," she whispered, rushing to his side. His hand felt cold when she took it between both of hers. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. "Elsie?" His voice was rough, barely audible. "I'm here," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm right here." He struggled to speak, each word seeming to cost him. "Fight. Don't let them take your life again." "Shh. Save your strength," she soothed, but his fingers tightened weakly around hers. "Mean it," he insisted. "You're stronger than they know." His eyes drifted closed again, medication pulling him under. Elsie sank into the chair beside his bed, still clutching his hand. Outside the window, Christmas lights twinkled mockingly in the gathering dark. She stayed through the night, dozing fitfully in the uncomfortable chair. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting medications. Around dawn, her phone buzzed, a message from her lawyer. Her heart sank as she read it. Her in-laws had already filed an emergency motion, using Hawk's assault as evidence that her association with him proved their claims about her judgment. Without him able to testify about the true nature of their relationship, about the documentation they'd gathered, the case was crumbling. "I'll be back soon," she whispered to Hawk's sleeping form, kissing his bruised knuckles before leaving. The cabin felt abandoned when she returned. Christmas decorations now seeming hollow and sad. The bread she'd baked sat untouched, hard as stone. The fire had long since died, leaving only cold ashes. Elsie sank to the floor beside the fireplace, wrapping her arms around herself as sobs racked her body. Everything they'd built together, the safe haven they'd created, was being torn away. She could give up now, let her in-laws win, retreat into the shadows they wanted to keep her in. Or she could rise. Her tears slowly subsided as she stared at the ashes, remembering Hawk's words. "Fight. Don't let them take your life again." The choice loomed before her like a mountain. Surrender to the familiar darkness, or stand up and fight for the light she'd finally found. She remained there as dusk settled around her, the weight of decision pressing on her heart. Morning light crept through the cabin windows, casting long shadows across the floor where Elsie had spent the night. Her muscles ached from sleeping against the cold hearth, but something else had awakened within her, a fierce determination she'd never known she possessed. She stood slowly, brushing ash from her clothes. The quiet cabin felt different now, not empty, but waiting. Walking to the kitchen table, she traced her fingers over the wooden box of seeds Hawk had given her for Christmas. "Time to grow," she whispered to herself. With steady hands, she gathered the documents they'd organized, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, letters proving her in-laws' attempts to claim her husband's property before his death, and photographs of the improvements she and Hawk had made to the land. Each piece of paper told part of their story. Elsie changed into her warmest clothes and packed everything into her worn leather bag. Before leaving, she stood in the doorway, remembering how Hawk had first brought her here, offering safety when everyone else had thrown her away. "I won't let them win," she promised the quiet rooms. Not this time. The walk into town took 45 minutes through the crisp morning air. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she made her way down the winding road. When she reached Main Street, several people nodded to her, not with the usual mixture of pity and judgment, but with something that looked like respect. The law office was a small brick building next to the post office. Inside, Mr. Patterson, her attorney, listened intently as she laid out everything: her marriage, her husband's death, her in-laws' manipulation, and finally, how Hawk had shown her what real protection looked like. "They want to paint him as dangerous," she explained, her voice growing stronger. "But he's the first person who ever taught me I deserve to feel safe, to feel worthy." Mr. Patterson reviewed the documents, nodding slowly. "This is good, Elsie, but we need more. Character witnesses, community support, people who can speak to both your capability and Hawk's true nature." "I know exactly where to start," Elsie said, standing up straight. Her first stop was the diner where Nina and Clara Foster held court most mornings. The elderly sisters' faces lit up when she entered. "Oh, honey," Clara said, pulling Elsie into a warm embrace. "We've been so worried." "How's our Hawk doing?" Nina asked, already pouring coffee into Elsie's usual cup. Elsie explained the situation, watching their expressions shift from concern to determination. "We need people who know the truth about both of us," she finished. "Will you help?" "You just try and stop us," Clara declared, already reaching for paper. "We've watched you bloom these past weeks, child. And that man, we remember when he first came back from overseas, so lost and hurting. You've healed each other." Together they wrote out detailed statements about the changes they'd witnessed in both Hawk and Elsie. Other customers in the diner, hearing their conversation, began approaching, with their own stories. Mrs. Johnson from the bakery described how Hawk had fixed her delivery van without charging her. Tom from the hardware store wrote about watching Elsie learn to use power tools, determined to maintain her land properly. Even Bill Jenkins, still recovering from his Christmas Eve furnace crisis, called in his statement about how Hawk had tried to help him despite the danger. By early afternoon, Elsie had collected 15 signed testimonials. She visited the Veterans Hall next, where 3 of Hawk's former unit members provided powerful statements about his service, his character, and his journey to find peace after returning home. "That man saved my life twice," explained Jim Cooper, a retired sergeant. "Once in combat, and once when I was in a dark place after coming home. He's got a good heart under all that leather and ink." The sun was low in the sky when Elsie finally made her way to the hospital. The halls were quieter now. The daytime bustle settled into evening calm. She found Hawk's room easily, her heart lifting when she saw him stir at her approach. His eyes opened slowly, still clouded with pain medication but clearer than the night before. A faint smile crossed his face when he saw her. "You're here," he whispered. "Always," she promised, taking his hand. "I've been gathering help. The whole town is standing with us, Hawk. They know who you really are, who we really are." He squeezed her fingers weakly. "Knew you were strong," he managed before his eyes began to drift closed again. Elsie leaned close, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. "Rest now. I'll fight for both of us." The walk back to the cabin in the gathering dusk felt different from her morning journey. Something had shifted inside her, like a lock finally turning. She built a fire in the hearth, its warmth chasing away the shadows of the previous night. Spreading the testimonials across the kitchen table, Elsie began practicing what she would say in court. Her voice grew steadier with each repetition. "My name is Elsie Hart," she declared to the flickering flames. "And I choose who I want to be." Later, wrapped in one of Hawk's old flannel shirts, she stood on the porch watching moonlight transform the snow into a field of diamonds. The cold air filled her lungs, sharp and clean. Here, in this place that should have frightened her but instead became home, she felt the full weight of her courage, not as a burden, but as a foundation. The moon cast her shadow long across the sparkling snow, and for the first time in her life, Elsie stood tall enough to match it. Dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and golds as Elsie stood before the mirror, smoothing the slightly worn navy blazer she'd found at the thrift store. Her hands trembled slightly as she fastened the buttons, but her eyes held steady determination. The woman staring back at her wasn't the same one who'd been thrown away months ago. The walk to the courthouse felt like both a moment and an eternity. Frost crunched beneath her sensible shoes, and her breath clouded in the winter morning air. As she approached the imposing brick building, she noticed small groups of people gathering near the entrance. Nina and Clara Foster waved from their spot by the steps, both wearing their Sunday best. "We brought reinforcements, dear," Clara called out, gesturing to the growing crowd of familiar faces. Pastor Granger stood talking with a group of veterans who'd known Hawk overseas. The diner owner who'd first shown Elsie kindness was there too, along with what seemed like half the town's elderly population, all the people she'd helped with small kindnesses over the past months. Inside the courtroom, Elsie's in-laws sat in the front row, her former father-in-law wearing a smug expression that made her stomach clench. His wife whispered something behind her hand, both of them glancing at Elsie with barely concealed disdain. "All rise," the bailiff called out, and Judge Martha Wilson entered the courtroom, her gray hair pulled back severely, reading glasses perched on her nose. When Elsie's name was called to testify, she walked to the stand with measured steps, refusing to let her nerves show. The worn wood of the witness chair felt solid beneath her, grounding her. "Please state your name for the record," the court reporter requested. "Elsie Marie Hart," she answered, her voice clear and steady. Her attorney guided her through her testimony, her night school classes in business law, the years of managing the farm's books while her husband was alive, the careful documentation she'd kept of every decision and transaction. "And how would you respond to allegations that you're being manipulated by Samuel Dalton?" her lawyer asked. Elsie sat straighter. "Hawk, Mr. Dalton, gave me something no one else ever had, the freedom to choose. He's never once tried to control me or my decisions about the land." One by one, witnesses came forward. Nina and Clara described how they'd watched Elsie grow stronger and more confident. Veterans spoke of Hawk's honor and integrity. Pastor Granger testified about both their characters, his quiet dignity lending weight to every word. The tension in the courtroom grew thick as the morning wore on. Judge Wilson's expression remained unreadable as she took notes, occasionally peering over her glasses at the proceedings. Just as the last scheduled witness finished, the heavy courtroom door creaked open. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery as Hawk appeared, leaning heavily on a cane. His face was still bruised, his movements careful, but his eyes burned with intensity. "Your Honor," he said, his deep voice carrying despite its softness, "I need to speak." Judge Wilson studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Approach the stand, Mr. Dalton." Hawk made his way slowly forward, each step clearly causing him pain. Once sworn in, he looked directly at the judge. "I've been accused of manipulating Elsie Hart," he began. "Truth is, she's the strongest person I've ever known. She doesn't belong to anyone but herself." He paused, his gaze finding Elsie's. "Though I'd be honored if she chose to share her life with mine." The gallery erupted in whispers. Elsie's hands trembled in her lap as tears threatened to spill. Her in-laws' faces had turned an interesting shade of red. Judge Wilson rapped her gavel once, restoring order. "I believe we'll take a 30-minute recess before announcing my decision," she declared, rising from the bench. As the judge exited, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Nina and Clara were dabbing at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Pastor Granger smiled knowingly. And Hawk, still standing despite his injuries, never took his eyes off Elsie. The next 30 minutes would determine everything, but for the first time in her life, Elsie wasn't afraid of the outcome. She knew exactly who she was now, and who she wanted to be. The heavy wooden doors creaked as Judge Wilson returned to her chambers, her black robes rustling as she took her seat. The courtroom fell into a hushed silence, thick with anticipation. Elsie's hands trembled in her lap as she watched the judge adjust her reading glasses and sort through the stack of documents before her. After careful review of the evidence presented, Judge Wilson began, her voice clear and measured, including detailed financial records, numerous character witnesses, and most notably, the documented pattern of fraudulent signatures on multiple land transfers. She paused, looking directly at Elsie's former in-laws. This court finds absolutely no merit to the petition questioning Miss Hart's competency. A soft murmur rippled through the gallery. Nina reached over to squeeze Clara's hand. Furthermore, the judge continued, her tone growing stern, the evidence suggests a deliberate attempt to defraud Miss Hart of her rightful property through manipulation and coercion. This court hereby confirms Elsie Hart's full legal rights to all property bequeathed to her by her late husband. The gallery erupted in applause. Elsie's former father-in-law's face turned purple with rage as he grabbed his wife's arm, practically dragging her toward the exit. The courthouse doors slammed behind them, but Elsie barely noticed. The room had started spinning, relief washing over her in overwhelming waves. She stumbled slightly, and suddenly Hawk was there, his strong arms steadying her despite his own injuries. She leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and pine that had become home to her. "You did it," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You fought back, and you won." People surrounded them, offering congratulations and well wishes. Pastor Granger blessed them both with tears in his eyes. Nina and Clara fussed over them like mother hens, insisting they'd bring dinner to the cabin later. As they made their way out of the courthouse, the winter, afternoon sun caught the fresh snow, making everything sparkle. They walked slowly down Main Street together, Hawk still using his cane, but keeping his free arm protectively around Elsie's shoulders. Shop owners came to their doors, waving and calling out congratulations. The diner owner insisted on sending them home with fresh coffee and pie. "Looks like you've got quite a fan club now," Hawk teased gently, as they finally turned onto the road leading to the cabin. Elsie smiled, watching their breath mingle in the cold air. "We both do," she corrected him. "They saw the real you all along." The sun was setting by the time they reached the cabin, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of pink and gold. Inside, Elsie bustled about making tea while Hawk eased himself into his favorite chair by the fireplace. The familiar routine felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a shadow had finally lifted. She brought 2 steaming mugs over, settling into the chair opposite him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. For believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. For giving me space to find my strength again." Hawk set his mug down carefully, his eyes serious as they met hers. "Elsie," he said, his voice gentle, "you had that strength all along. I just refused to let anyone else tell you otherwise." He reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "I never wanted you to leave," he admitted. "Not from the first day. But I needed you to know you could." The firelight danced across his face, softening the scar on his cheek. He took a deep breath, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I'm not asking to be your protector anymore. You've proven you don't need one. But if you'll have me, I'd like to stay as your partner. Only if you choose it. The warmth of the fire, the comfort of their shared space, the steady pressure of his hand in hers, it all felt like coming home. Elsie looked at the man before her, seeing not the intimidating figure who'd first appeared on her in-laws' porch, but the gentle soul who'd given her the greatest gift of all, the freedom to choose her own path. The early spring sunrise painted golden streaks across the cabin's weathered logs as Elsie stirred from sleep. Through the bedroom window, she heard the rhythmic sound of hammering and the cheerful songs of mountain bluebirds. The morning air held that special softness that comes when winter finally releases its grip, carrying promises of warmth and renewal. Wrapping herself in a well-worn sweater, Elsie stepped onto the front porch. The sight before her made her heart swell. Hawk knelt by the garden fence, carefully replacing broken boards and tightening loose posts. Patches of melting snow revealed dark earth beneath, and tiny green shoots were already pushing through in protected corners. "Good morning," she called softly, descending the porch steps. Hawk looked up with a smile that still made her breath catch, even after all these months. "Morning," he replied, setting down his hammer. "Thought we should get the fence fixed before planting those seeds." His eyes held meaning beyond just garden planning. They both knew these seeds represented so much more. Elsie went inside and returned with the wooden box of seeds he'd given her that Christmas Eve, along with 2 steaming cups of coffee. They sat on a dry patch of ground, planning where each variety should go. "The tomatoes will need full sun," Elsie mused, sketching in the soil with a stick. "And the herbs can line the path here." Together they worked through the morning, clearing winter debris and turning the soil. Hawk's strong hands broke up the harder earth, while Elsie carefully measured out planting rows. When she accidentally sprayed him with the watering can, his surprised laugh echoed off the mountains. She couldn't help joining in, marveling at how natural their happiness felt now. "Never thought I'd be gardening," Hawk admitted, wiping his brow. "But it feels right, building something that grows." Elsie touched his arm gently. "Everything we've built feels right." By early afternoon, the garden beds were ready. Elsie showed Hawk how to plant each seed at just the right depth, their fingers working together in the warm soil. They had just finished the last row when they heard vehicles approaching. Nina and Clara's old station wagon led a small parade of cars up the dirt road. The elderly sisters emerged carrying covered dishes, followed by several other seniors from town, all bearing food or flowers. "We just had to come thank you both properly," Clara announced, her eyes twinkling. "You've shown this whole town what real courage looks like." "And real love," Nina added softly, patting Elsie's cheek. They all gathered in the cabin's newly cleaned main room, sharing stories and laughter over home-cooked food. Elderly Mr. Patterson, who rarely spoke, stood up and raised his coffee cup. "To Elsie and Hawk," he said gruffly, "for proving it's never too late for a fresh start." As the afternoon light began to soften, their guests departed with warm hugs and promises to return. Elsie and Hawk walked them to their cars, waving until the last vehicle disappeared down the mountain road. In the quiet that followed, they settled on the porch steps, watching the lengthening shadows paint stripes across their newly planted garden. A few early crocuses had pushed through near the fence, their purple petals bright against the dark earth. Elsie leaned her head against Hawk's shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him. His arm came around her naturally, holding her close as the mountain air grew cooler. "I never dreamed of this," he whispered. "Thank you for choosing to stay. For choosing us." They rose together as the sunset painted the mountain peaks in shades of rose and gold. Standing at the edge of their garden, they looked out over the valley below. The future stretched before them like the rose they'd planted, full of possibility, rooted in respect, nurtured by love. Hawk's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as naturally as the vines they'd soon grow. In that moment, watching the day's last light gild their small piece of earth, Elsie felt the profound rightness of where life had led them. Here was their haven, not just a cabin and a garden, but a home built on courage, trust, and the kind of love that grows stronger with each passing season. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.